A poor widow begged, "Please save my child." The mountain man's response will shock you. The mountain slept beneath a sky the color of iron. Wind swept through the pines in long, shivering sighs, carrying the taste of snow and wood smoke. Down the narrow trail that wound toward the valley, a woman moved through the whiteness as if she were a shadow made of breath. Her arms held a small bundle close to her chest, her child, half a year old, half a miracle still alive in a world that had not wanted either of them. Her dress was torn at the hem, boots cracked and soaked through. The snow was already swallowing her footprints. The woman's name was Clara Ward, though names did not matter much anymore. She had buried her husband 6 weeks ago in frozen ground too hard for any tears to soften. Fever had taken him, then fire had taken their small cabin a week later. Since then she had walked, first to town, where pity turned to suspicion the moment she asked for food, then to a church where they prayed for her but would not let her in. The child had begun to cough, weak and sharp, like a blade nicking her heart each time. So she had followed the river upstream, chasing the rumor of a trapper's cabin somewhere near the ridge. Someone had told her once there lived a man who owed nothing to anyone, but helped when asked. Now the wind was a whip. She leaned into it, face burning and then numb. The baby stirred, whimpered once. She pressed her lips to his forehead and whispered something that might have been a prayer or a promise. Ahead, the faintest thread of smoke curled upward through the falling snow. When she reached the cabin door, she could no longer feel her hands. The wood was rough, half buried beneath the drift. She knocked once, then again. The door opened with a groan, and light spilled out, gold and fire-warm. A man stood there, tall, broad-shouldered, wrapped in a coat of faded buckskin. His beard was silvered, his eyes dark as river stones. For a long moment he only looked at her, measuring the shape of desperation before him. Her lips parted, but her voice came out as a broken whisper. "Please, save my child." Then the world fell away. When she woke, she was lying beneath a heavy quilt that smelled of pine and smoke. Her skin burned where the cold had bitten it, and her throat ached. The crackle of fire filled the room, steady and alive. The baby was asleep near the hearth, wrapped in an old wool blanket. Steam rose from a pot on the stove, and through the blur of her vision she saw the man pouring broth into a wooden bowl. He noticed her eyes open and moved closer. "Don't try to speak yet," he said quietly. His voice was deep, but not unkind. "You've been half frozen for near a day." She tried to lift herself, but the weight of exhaustion pressed her down. "My boy. He's fine. Warm. Fed some milk I keep for winter trade." Her relief came out as a small sob. She turned her face away, ashamed of the sound. The man set the bowl on the table beside her. "Eat when you can. You'll need strength." He stepped back, as if careful not to disturb the space around her. There was a stillness about him that was not coldness, exactly, more like the quiet of someone who had learned not to expect company. The cabin itself was simple but strong, walls lined with pelts, tools hung with careful order, the faint scent of tobacco and cedar smoke. Snowlight glowed dimly through the single small window. The man worked in silence for a time, mending a broken chair leg, his hands steady. She watched him, feeling a strange calm, as if her mind were thawing slower than her body. By dusk she could sit up. The broth tasted of roots and game, unfamiliar but rich. She thanked him softly. He only nodded, not meeting her eyes. The child stirred again, and she went to gather him, her movements slow and tender. The man watched from across the room, expression unreadable. After a while, he said, "Name's Elias." "Clara," she replied. He nodded once more, as though confirming what he already knew. Outside, the wind deepened into a low moan. He added another log to the fire. The light flickered over his face, lines carved deep, but not cruel. He looked like a man who had built his own solitude and then forgotten how to live inside it. For 3 days the storm did not stop. Snow piled high against the windows, and the world outside became a single unbroken whiteness. Inside, time slowed to the rhythm of the fire's breath. Clara tended her child, warmed her hands, sewed the rip in her sleeve with thread he lent her. Elias worked quietly, mending traps, sharpening knives, splitting wood. They spoke little. Yet something passed between them in the silence, a slow awareness that neither was alone anymore. Sometimes, while the child slept, Clara caught herself watching Elias as he worked. His movements were deliberate, patient. When he repaired the cracked handle of his axe, his touch was almost gentle, as if he were fixing something living. She thought of her husband then, quick-tempered, always certain. Elias seemed made of patience itself. She wondered what kind of life taught a man to move like that. On the 4th morning, she woke to a strange sound, the clear, small laughter of her son. Elias sat near the hearth, the child perched on his knee. He had carved a little horse from pine wood and was making it gallop clumsily across the floorboards. The boy giggled so hard his tiny hands shook. Clara froze in the doorway, her heart suddenly full of something she hadn't felt since before the fever, before the grave, joy. The sound was fragile and new, like the first bird after a long storm. Elias looked up, slightly embarrassed, and set the toy aside. He was restless, he said. Figured he could use some company. Clara knelt beside them, brushing a hand over her son's hair. You made this. He shrugged. Keeps me busy. Wood's better company than most folks. She smiled faintly. Then I'm glad it made an exception. He didn't answer, but the corner of his mouth twitched as if a smile had nearly found its way there. Later, when the boy had fallen asleep again, Clara sat by the window, mending her shawl. She spoke softly, almost to herself. We had a small place once. Near a creek. My husband built it. Said the land would be kind to us if we worked hard enough. Her voice trembled. But he took sick. The land wasn't kind after that. Elias looked up from the table, where he was scraping a hide clean. You did what you could, he said. That's all any soul can do. She met his eyes then. They were steady, not pitying. Something inside her loosened. She looked away before tears could rise. That evening, he showed her how to feed the stove, how to bank the fire so it wouldn't die overnight. She noticed his hands, scarred, roughened by cold, yet careful as they placed each log. You live here alone? She asked. Most years. He wiped the soot from his fingers. Wasn't always so. She waited, but he said no more. The silence was not awkward, it felt like a place to rest. When the wind quieted that night, the world outside shimmered with moonlight. Clara stood at the door, looking out. The snow gleamed silver, untouched. She felt the warmth of the cabin at her back and the endless cold ahead. For the first time in months, she wasn't afraid. The days that followed were simple. She helped grind dried herbs for his winter stores, and he showed her where to fetch snow to melt for water. Sometimes they spoke, sometimes not. The child learned to crawl, his laughter filling corners that had once known only echo. Elias seemed almost bewildered by the noise, but he never asked them to quiet. Once, Clara saw him pause at the door, watching her rock the boy to sleep, and the look on his face was something she could not name, half grief, half peace. When the storm finally broke, the sun returned with blinding clarity. The world outside glittered like glass. The air was sharp, clean, full of unspoken beginnings. Clara knew she could not stay. The thaw would bring travelers, hunters. She had to find a place of her own again. That morning, she packed what little she had, some dried meat, a spare blanket, the wooden horse Elias had carved for the boy. He stood by the hearth, hands resting on the back of a chair. You don't have to go just yet, he said quietly. I can't take more than you've already given. I didn't give it, he replied. It was there to take. She hesitated. The child reached toward Elias, babbling softly, as if to protest her leaving. She smiled, but her throat ached. You've been kind to us, Elias. I'll never forget it. He looked toward the door, not at her. Storm's done. Roads'll open soon. She slipped her hand into her pocket and drew out a small, bent ring, the last thing she owned from her husband. Take it, she said. For all you did. He shook his head. A life saved owes no debt. She closed her fingers around the ring again. Then for remembrance. He said nothing. The silence between them stretched, filled with all the things neither knew how to name. She glanced once more at the cabin, the warmth, the smell of pine, the faint laughter still echoing in her mind. Then she turned toward the trail. The snow was soft beneath her boots now, melting under the first sun of spring. Each step away from the cabin felt heavier than the last. She did not look back until the path curved upward, and then she saw him standing in the doorway, a still figure against the golden light. For a long moment, neither moved. Then she lifted her hand in farewell, a small gesture swallowed by distance. He raised his in return, just once, before the curve of the hill took her from sight. The world ahead was uncertain, but the fear had lessened. Somewhere behind her, the fire still burned. The thought warmed her more than the sun could. As dusk fell, she reached the ridge and looked down at the valley below, a ribbon of river, a scatter of bare trees, the horizon blushing with dying light. She pressed her cheek to her child's head and whispered, "We'll be all right." The boy stirred and smiled in his sleep. Behind her, the mountain wind carried faint echoes of the life she had left behind, a man's slow, steady footsteps, the whisper of logs being split, the hush of a cabin settling for the night. The storm had ended, but something else had begun, quietly, like the first green under snow, unseen but alive. And though Clara did not yet know it, the road ahead would circle back, as all good roads do, to the one place where warmth had asked nothing in return. For now, she walked on beneath the pale sky, her child in her arms, her heart lighter than it had been in a long, long time. Winter returned like a familiar ache. The valley, once green with promise, lay buried again under the hush of white. The mountains stood unmoved, tall and patient, as if they had been waiting for something, or someone, to come back. Inside his cabin, Elias worked by the dim glow of lamplight, shaping a new handle for his axe. Each scrape of the blade against the wood sounded too loud in the silence. He had lived through many winters, but this one carried an emptiness that gnawed in quiet places of his heart. It had been months since the woman left, months since her child's laughter faded from these walls. He had tried to forget her face, but memory was stubborn. He still saw the way her eyes reflected the firelight, soft and weary, the way she held her boy as though protecting the only fragile truth left in the world. Sometimes he woke at night to the sound of wind brushing the eaves and thought he heard her voice calling softly in the dark. He told himself it was only the storm. The snow deepened by the hour. Elias stepped outside, pulling his coat close. The sky was heavy with the promise of more. He checked the traps near the tree line, finding little. The cold had driven most creatures deeper into the woods. As he turned back toward the cabin, something flickered in the distance, a small, wavering light. His breath caught. It moved slowly, as though someone carried a lantern through the storm. He waited, heart pounding. When the figure finally came into view, he felt the world tilt for a moment. It was Clara. Her hair was dusted white, her coat torn at the sleeve, and she clutched her child tight against her. The boy was older now, his face thinner but alive. Elias reached her in 3 strides. "You'll freeze," he said, taking her arm and guiding her toward the door. She stumbled once, too weak to protest. Inside, he laid the child by the fire, his hands moving fast, automatic. He gave her water, pulled the quilt around her shoulders. Only when color began to return to her face did he ask, "Why are you here?" She looked up, eyes glassy with exhaustion. "They tried to take him," she whispered. "The people at the mission. Said I couldn't care for a child on my own." Her voice trembled, but anger flickered beneath it. "I couldn't let them. So I ran." Elias stood still, watching her. She was shaking, but there was something unbroken in her gaze. "You came a long way," he said quietly. "There was nowhere else to go." He nodded once. "You came home, then?" The words hung between them, strange and right all at once. For 2 days, the storm sealed them inside again, the world outside a blur of white. Elias hunted through his stores for what little food he had left. Clara helped where she could, tending the fire, drying their clothes by the hearth. The child, restless but bright, followed Elias around the room, tugging at his sleeve, laughing when he carved another toy, this time a bird with wings outstretched. The quiet between man and woman no longer felt like distance. It was something else now, an understanding grown out of hardship. She asked him once, "You ever think about leaving these mountains?" He paused, knife midair. "Used to," he said. "Years back. Had a wife once. We talked about moving closer to town. But winter came early that year. Fever took her and the babe." His voice was flat, not from coldness, but from the habit of carrying grief too long. "After that, I stayed." Clara listened, her eyes soft. "You never remarried?" He shook his head. "Didn't seem right. Some things don't ask to be replaced." She understood that more than he knew. "I thought if I kept moving, I'd stop missing what I lost. But everywhere I go, it's the same, empty in different shapes." The fire popped, sending a spark upward. Their eyes met in that moment of silence. He reached for another log and placed it gently on the flames. "Sometimes," he said, "emptiness just means there's room for something new." On the 3rd morning, a sound broke through the calm, whose crunching snow. Elias's hand went instinctively to the rifle by the door. Through the frosted window he saw them, 3 riders approaching, cloaks dusted white, guns at their sides. Town men, from the look of them. Clara's face drained of color. "It's them," she whispered. He didn't ask how they found her. He only said, "Stay inside." Then he stepped out into the cold. The wind cut across the clearing, sharp as a blade. Elias stood with the calm of a man who had nothing left to lose. The riders stopped a few yards away. Their leader, a thick man with a red scarf, dismounted. "We're looking for a woman," he said, voice rough. "Took a child from the mission. You seen her?" Elias met his gaze. "Haven't been to town in months." The man smirked. "That right? Funny, 'cause I see a woman's tracks leading straight to your door." Elias didn't move. "Ain't your business what tracks lead where." The leader's smile thinned. "You protecting her? That's a crime." Elias's voice was quiet. "So's taking a child from his mother." The man's hand drifted toward his gun. The world seemed to hold its breath. Then, from inside the cabin, came the cry of the child, a small, human sound that cut through the cold like a bell. The riders glanced toward the noise. Elias didn't flinch. "You should ride on," he said evenly. "Storm's getting worse. Roads won't hold you long." The leader looked at him, then at the sky, and cursed under his breath. "This ain't over," he spat, climbing back onto his horse. The men turned, hooves kicking up snow, and disappeared into the trees. Elias stood there until their figures vanished completely, then went back inside. Clara was near the fire, clutching her son, eyes wide. When she saw him, she began to cry, not out of fear, but relief so sharp it hurt. He sat beside her, not touching her, just letting the warmth of his presence say what words could not. "They'll come back," she whispered. "Maybe," he said. "But not tonight." That night, sleep did not come easily. Elias sat by the fire long after Clara and the boy drifted off. He watched the flames dance over the walls and thought about what it meant to protect someone again. He had lived so long building walls against the world that he had forgotten how to open a door for it. But now the door had opened on its own, and 2 lives had walked through. When dawn came, the storm had passed. The valley lay bright beneath the sunlight, every tree rimmed with frost. Clara woke early and found Elias outside, repairing the fence line near the slope. She walked out, pulling her shawl tight, and stood beside him. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "Snow bent it near down," he replied. "Needs mending, same as most things." She watched his hands move, steady, unhurried. "You risked your life for me yesterday." He kept his eyes on the fence. "Would have done the same for anyone. But you didn't." He paused, lowering the hammer. "You and the boy belong here, least till spring." "Belong?" she asked softly. He met her gaze, the corners of his eyes creasing in the pale light. "Ain't about what's owned or earned. Some places just know when they're needed." Her throat tightened. For a moment, neither spoke. Then the child's laughter drifted from the cabin window, warm and wild in the cold air. They both turned toward it, smiling without meaning to. The days grew gentler after that. The danger still hovered at the edge of thought, but inside the cabin, life began to take root again. Clara mended clothes, cleaned the shelves, hummed old songs by the fire. Elias hunted, brought back rabbits, stacked more wood than the winter could burn. At night, when the child slept, they talked, slow, unguarded words that built bridges neither had planned to cross. She told him about her husband, how he'd been proud but careless, how she'd spent her marriage holding things together. He told her about the wife he buried, the silence afterward that never left his bones. In those quiet hours, something unspoken began to bloom, a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. One evening, as snow fell soft outside, Clara looked at him across the table. "Do you ever wonder," she asked, "why kindness feels heavier than cruelty?" He frowned slightly. "Heavier?" She nodded. "Because cruelty ends. Kindness stays. You carry it, whether you want to or not." He thought for a long moment. "Then I'll carry it gladly." The simplicity of his answer stole her breath. The next day, a lone traveler came down the ridge, a preacher on horseback, seeking shelter before nightfall. His beard was long, his eyes kind beneath the frost. Elias welcomed him in, gave him food and warmth. When the preacher saw Clara, recognition flickered. "You're the widow from the mission," he said gently. "They told me you were gone." Clara stiffened, but Elias spoke before she could. "She's safe here." The preacher nodded slowly. "I see that. Maybe the Lord led her to the right hands after all." He stayed the night, telling quiet stories by the fire. Before he slept, he looked at the two of them, the man and the woman sitting close but not touching, the child between them, and said, "If you'd wish it, I can bless your union. Give your boy a name that's safe to speak in town again." Elias looked at Clara. Her eyes searched his, uncertain. There was no ring, no ceremony prepared, only the soft crackle of fire and the hush of falling snow outside. But in that moment, she saw in his face the truth she had been running toward without knowing it. Steadiness, not rescue, love, not pity. She nodded. The preacher smiled faintly. Then let it be done. He spoke the words low and simple. Elias and Clara stood side by side, hands barely touching, the child clinging to her skirt. When the blessing ended, the preacher said, "May your home stand firm through every storm." They thanked him, and that night the cabin glowed brighter than it ever had. Clara held her son, his small hands tangled in her hair. Elias sat near the fire, head bowed, a peace settling over him that he hadn't felt since before loss had turned him to stone. Outside, the snow fell softly, erasing the last of the footprints from the day before. Years later, people who passed through those mountains spoke of a cabin where laughter could sometimes be heard even in the coldest winter. They said a man lived there with a woman and a grown child, and that no matter how harsh the season, a light always burned in their window. Inside, the years had shaped them into quiet contentment. The world remained wild beyond the trees, but their hearts had found rest. Sometimes, when the wind rose, Clara would sit by the fire and remember the day she had knocked on his door, half dead with cold. She would look at Elias, now older, his hands still rough but gentle, and she would think how mercy had looked like strength the first time she saw it, and how love, when it came, had looked like a man simply opening his door. And on those nights when snow began to fall again, Elias would step outside, breathe the frozen air, and listen to the stillness. Somewhere beneath the white hush of the valley, he could feel the steady pulse of life that had refused to die. He smiled then, just slightly, and whispered into the wind, "Some storms come to stay, but so does warmth." Behind him, through the window, Clara's laughter glowed against the firelight, and for the first time in years, the mountain felt alive again. Subscribe now, partner. More soulful Wild West stories are coming, told slow and true, like the land itself.